So this is Program 1, the clay project, which is animal sculpture. And for this you need a chunk of clay. And in the first Clay Basics video, I showed you how to cut the big 25-pound block into 24 chunks of clay. And each student should get a chunk relatively this size. If it's a little bit smaller, that's fine. You can always give them more. So this clay, as I mentioned in the Clay Basics video, has been wedged so that there are no air bubbles in here. And this, when we're building a sculpture like this, it's really important to not trap air bubbles. The reason is because as the clay dries, and especially in the kiln, steam builds up in those little holes, and if it doesn't have an escape route, it will blow up the whole piece. So it's really important that you watch this and how I attach things. At the K1 level, their exposure to clay has been Play-Doh pretty much. So you want to try and tell them that this is different from Play-Doh and different rules apply. For example, if they take a piece of clay and they flatten it out like they would with Play-Doh, and then they roll it back into a ball, I've now trapped air all through this ball, and if I try and put that in the kiln, it's going to explode. So you want them to not do that. If you see that your kids have gone completely flat, ask them to cut a flat shape like a butterfly or something like that out of the shape. But I'm going to show you a few really easy techniques to build an animal. So I'm going to work on doing this little kind of gecko. It looks a lot more complicated than it is. The first thing I'm going to do is take about half of my clay, and I'm going to just try and push it and pull it. And what I want to do is pull a long tail. So you can see as I'm doing that, I'm just kind of rotating it and stretching the clay out to make a long tail. I could kind of roll it a little bit like this to make kind of a coil. Because this is heavier, there's going to be a weak spot there, so I would worry about that. And when I'm rolling a coil, if I start with my fingers closed, and then as I open them, that stretches the clay. So I'm going to stretch that out, and then this is the main part of the body here. Okay, so I have this weird wonky looking thing. So this is going to be my tail here, and I'm going to go ahead, and I'm just going to roll that on itself. When you're making these and your class is making these, please ask them not to leave any long, fragile pieces sticking off of their piece. They tend to break really easily, and it's much harder for me to get them through the kiln. So here I have the tail rolled up, and this is the main part of the body, which you can see now. I can just take my hands and kind of round it off like that. Now he needs a head, so I'm going to take another little piece of clay off of here. And that's actually not such a bad shape already. So I'm just going to kind of push that. See, I'm using my fingers to make eyes. I can pull off some clay if I want to. Maybe there's a little bit too much clay there. And a mouth. And then I'm going to round this. Now here's what's really important. So you have two pieces. And with Play-Doh, all the kids would have to do would be to squish these together and they would stay. But with this clay, that won't happen. As these pieces dry, there's nothing holding them together, so those pieces will just come apart like that. So what you have to do is score. So this is where your fork comes in. So scoring is just roughing up that surface. Doesn't have to be really deep, but you just want to kind of mess it up. And then you take a little bit of the slip and you just put it on there. Slip is like the glue. It's the same clay and water. And then when I attach these, I'm going to kind of push them together and wiggle all that slip into those recesses. So you can see I kind of got misshapen here and there's a little bit of extra slip. I can just either take my finger or a tool and pull that extra slip off. I can just take my finger and rub it and get rid of that seam completely. Now you'll notice that I didn't slip and score my tail. I could, if I really wanted to stay put, I could score right here, put a little bit of slip there, and then attach that on. And then it's really going to stay put right there. Okay, so now you can see the head isn't exactly the shape I wanted it to be. So I'm going to just sort of push it back into shape a little bit. But I like that shape. That's okay. Now, I want him to have nice legs that he's standing up on. So the easiest way to do that is to roll a coil. So I'm going to take another chunk of clay and roll it. Starting with my fingers closed, and then I'm going to open them. You can see the clay is getting longer and longer. Okay, so now I have a nice coil that I can use for my feet. So I need two pieces. I need front legs. So I'm going to cut that. Okay, so you can see it's just a coil that's shaped like this. Now I'm going to turn it over in my hand maybe. I'm going to score here where I want to attach the legs. I'll make sure that's even. And I'm going to score here. I'm going to put some slip on here. And then I'm going to attach this piece right there. Really push it down. Okay, so now I have to shape the feet. Because if I want this to sit up like this, I really need the feet to support it up like that. So that's pretty good actually. It's kind of sitting like that. If you make this coil too thin, it's not going to support the weight of this clay. The other thing you could do is if this is really heavy, you could pull some of the clay out of here so it's not as solid. And you just use a tool and take some of the clay out. You won't really see it because it's underneath. And that'll make it a little bit thinner and a little less likely to blow up in the kiln. I could even take my finger down underneath there, make like a little hollow. So now it's a little bit lighter. So let's see. Here we are, back with the feet. I'm going to kind of point these out a little bit, make them into a better shape. I know geckos kind of have long, pointy fingernails, but that's hard to do with clay. So I'm going to just do that. You can see this is pretty heavy, so it's starting to fall. But I'm going to use the rest of my slab to make two back feet. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to slip, score, and slip. And on the feet. A little bit of slip. And then I'm going to attach those just on like that and that. Really make sure they're on there. So, and then I'm going to reposition him. Now, this is really heavy, so this isn't working. You can see that this is falling over. So what I'm going to do is a little bit of a fix. So I'm going to take some more of my clay and I'm going to make a thicker coil. And I'm going to see if I can't attach that on and make it a little bit stronger. So then I would have to score all this all the way across and score this. So anytime you're attaching two pieces, you need to score and slip. Now I'm going to add this in. It's a little bit wide, so I'm just going to cut it. So I'm going to just give it a little bit of extra clay. So it can support the weight. Let's see how I did. Flip her back over. Oh, that's pretty good. So now that I have everything kind of where I want it, I can look at it and look at the shape. I could try and push or pull the clay a little bit to add features. If I don't like those lines at the shoulder, at the head, I can just use my finger to get rid of them. If your clay starts cracking in places, you can just take your finger into the slip bucket and add a little bit of slip on here and just rub it in. That'll get rid of any of the cracks. So I'm kind of happy with this. I could keep going if I wanted to add more detail. You can see she's sticking to the mat a little bit. If I wanted to add some texture here, maybe I wanted to add some lines down his back, I could do that with any one of the tools. I know they have that kind of bumpy reptilian skin, so little pokes would be good. Or you can do this kind of detailing in the glaze portion. So now I'm going to call this finished. So what I would like you to do as parent volunteers is make sure that there's the initials and room number on the bottom, very legibly. You need to be able to read the initials, and I need to be able to read the room number. And then you would put them on the clay shelf to dry. When you put them on the clay shelf, you want to make sure they're positioned the way that they're meant to be. So if stuff shifts while you're walking over there, when you put it down on the clay shelf, just take time to make sure the feet are kind of down and the way they want to be. Because once the clay is dry, you won't be able to go back into it. If you don't finish, if your classes don't finish in the one session, you can take a plastic bag, these food and bread bags that I have in the orange cabinet, and just put your project very gently inside the bag with your extra clay and tie it up. Make sure you write their names on the bag so you know whose is whose. And you can put these on the clay drying shelf. And as long as they're wrapped up in the plastic bag, they will not dry out. So only do this if you're not finished with the project. And I will know that you're not finished. When you are finished with the project, the kids can take home their scrap clay in the same bag. Just make sure that the projects are marked very clearly with the initials and room number, and they're put on the clay drying shelf in the position that they need to. This is really important. If they build an animal that wants, like this little elephant, that wants to sit on its butt like this, it needs to be able to sit on its butt like this. If it's meant to be down on its feet, it needs to sit on its feet like this little cat, like that, okay? There's one other thing that I want to show you before we finish, and that is if you have a project that is very big, there are things you can do to reduce the amount of clay. One of them is to pull clay out of the bottom, like I did with the gecko. Just go under there with a tool and really get in there. And that reduces the likelihood that it will blow up in the kiln. Another thing you can do is what I did with this little snail that I made. And that was, I'm just going to do it really quickly. If you have a flat piece, like the snail's body was a little flat piece, and then I wanted to put this shell, instead of a ball of clay, you know, taking a ball of clay and sticking it on there, a good thing to do is to make a little hollow cup. So you would do that by just taking a chunk of clay, sticking your finger down the middle, and pinching and turning and pinching and turning until you get a little cup. Like that. It's not beautiful, but that's okay, because I can cut, using any one of these tools, I can cut off the excess that I don't want. And now I have a little dome, which is bigger than my slab. to go on top of here. He's a little bit bigger. That's okay. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. Pulled off some, so I have to reattach it. Just like that. Now it's the right size. So I would score all the way around the edge of this and where I want to attach it, all the way around here. And I'm not worried that I'm making a mess of the clay because you can just rub it down. Then I'm putting more slip. Then I'm going to attach this right onto here. You have to be careful because it's hollow. Okay, so now you have a dome on a slab. And it looks solid, but it's hollow. And here's the important thing. You must put a little air hole. So there was a little kind of a divot there, so I'm just going to make that into a hole. As long as there's a hole into that cavity, the steam will have a place to escape. So while this looks like a nice solid snail, it's actually hollow in there. And there you have it. So then you would just write your initials and room number on the bottom and put it up on the clay shelf to dry. Once they are dry, they'll look like this, a light gray. I will take them and put them in the kiln. You don't have to worry about that. And then I will put them in your class cabinet when they are done firing. I ask that you do the wet clay portion and then do a whole other project while you're waiting to get your bisque clay back into your class cabinets. Once you get your bisque clay back, you'll be ready to go ahead and glaze. So watch the glaze demo video and find out how to do that.